The Second World War stalked the Nobel Prize for Literature winners in this decade between 1937 and 1947. But this decade includes the best novelists you have never heard of. The favourite woman writer of Latin America in the 1930s and the most famous French author of the mid-20th century. I'm Jeff Rich, this is the Burning Archive, and you're joining me on the 120 Nobels Challenge, where I am reading all 120 winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature over the next 120 days until the 2024 winner is announced, and sharing some of the stories and where you can read your favourites or some of the famous and forgotten authors yourself, all for free by following the links in my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com. And this week we are reading the winners from 1937 to 1947. So who are they? In 1937, Roger de Gard won the Nobel Prize from France. In 1938, Pearl Buck from the United States. In 1939, Frans Sillanpää from Finland, and in 1944, obviously there's a break during World War II, Johannes Jensen from Denmark won the prize, and in 1945, Gabriela Mistral, the very first Southern American to win the Nobel Prize from Chile. And in 1946, Hermann Hesse from Germany or Switzerland won the prize. And finally in 1947, rounding off our 7 winners for this week, André Gide from France won. Let's go through them all. Roger de Gard, born in 1881 and lived to 1958 from France. Roger de Gard was a great 20th century novelist. He may well be the best novelist of the 20th century you have never heard of. I had never heard of him until I started this 120 Nobels Challenge. Yet his story kind of resonates with the time. His great novel, Les Thibauts, about 2 brothers with the surname Thibault, was a plea for international peace based on de Gard's own experience of the Dreyfus case in the early 20th century and the tragedy of World War I. And indeed, de Gard himself had served in the military during World War I. He won the Nobel Prize for this long 8-volume novel, which is sometimes known as a roman fleuve, a river novel, vast sweeping range of ideas and characters and settings. A complex portrait of the psychology and the history behind the people. And the 2 brothers, one of the brothers who are the heroes of the novel, are trying to promote peace before World War I and are deeply disappointed when their ambitions fail. It is a tragic story of history, and de Gard is a wonderful novelist. And I've got a few more anecdotes about him in my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. The 1938 winner was Pearl Buck from the United States. She was a popular novelist, and she was popular because she wrote novels about Chinese, the peasant life of China, and memoirs of her and her parents' experience as American Protestant missionaries in China. Now, when she won the prize in 1938, the war between Japan and China had already begun. It certainly had begun in 1937. Some say it began in 1931. And America was on the side of China. It was in conflict with Japan for control of the Pacific. And as it had done many times before, the Swedish Academy that awards the Nobel Prize for Literature was awarding the prize in sympathy for, I guess, a victim nation, let's say, in a major international conflict. And yet they did not give the prize to a Chinese writer. They gave the prize to an American missionary in China. And that was what Pearl Buck was. She had gone to China as an infant with her missionary parents and grew up into the missionary life herself. The missionary life, like many of the expatriates living in China from Europe and North America in the late 19th century, the second half of the 19th century, was an enclave of privilege, while China descended into its infamous century of humiliation provoked by opium wars, the Taiping Rebellion, the looting and aggression of the British Empire and other European powers, and of course also missionaries and business people from the United States of America. That was the social circle from which Pearl Buck came, and she yet wrote with great compassion about the lives of the peasants. It really shone through. But when after she'd won her prize in 1938, over the next 10 years, there was an absolute tragedy, of course, in China in the Second World War. 10 million people died, partly at the hands of Chiang Kai-shek, who of course the Americans were supporting, and who fled to Taiwan after the Chinese Revolution in 1949. Pearl Buck really desperately wanted to go back to China after the war, but she was prohibited from doing so by the Chinese, or People's Republic of China, and perhaps for good reason, because she sympathised very much with the cause of Taiwanese independence. And I've got a few more stories about the remarkable life and fiction of Pearl Buck in the Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. The 1938 winner went to a Finnish writer, the first Finnish writer from Finland to win the prize, Frans, and forgive me if I don't get his pronunciation of the name quite right, Frans Sillanpää, who lived between 1888 and 1964. Now, he was the first Finnish winner of the prize, and Finland was a very culturally complex place in 1939. There was a conflict between Russia or the Soviet Union in Finland. More broadly, there was Swedish culture in Finland, there was Finnish culture in Finland, there was Russian culture in Finland, there was the culture of the Sami and other indigenous peoples in Finland as well. Sillanpää wrote in Finnish, and he was another of many Nobel laureates who advocated the cause of peace. He was an admirer of science and a man of rural Finland. The Nobel Committee honoured him for his deep understanding of his country's peasantry and the exquisite art with which he has portrayed their way of life and their relationship with nature. He came from a peasant family and wrote short stories and novels of the Finland he knew. And his major novel is one called The Meek Heritage, which is a portrait of the civil war in Finland in 1918, which bears a close relationship to the Russian Revolution. The effect of the Russian Revolution had an effect in neighbouring Finland. Sillanpää directly witnessed some of these events, and he has a very moving account of it in The Meek Heritage, which I quote from in my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. In 1944, Johannes Jensen won the Nobel Prize. Again, we have a gap there of 5 years while World War II is raging, yet the prize does return in 1944 before the end of the war, either in the Pacific or in Europe. Jensen was a prolific writer of novels, poetry, essays and journalism. He's remembered for a classic historical novel that was translated only in a fresh translation only about 12 or so years ago. And he very much celebrated the dynamic modern commercial life of the 20th century, which he associated not with Europe but with America. He celebrated science, technology, the metropolis, pragmatic materialism and commerce. And he was not alone in doing so at the time. He really had a love affair with America, but it was disappointed a little bit over time. At times he found Americans just that little bit crass and vulgar. The last few years of his life before the Nobel Prize were quite tragic. He left America disappointed with its crass commercialism in 1939, returned to Denmark, and within the year, really, his country is occupied by Germany. Jensen then burns 30 years of diaries and letters in which he was worried there might be some sentiments that would raise the ire of the occupying authorities. His great novel is called The Fall of the King. It was published in 1901, and in 1999, nearly 100 years later, it was voted the best Danish novel of the 20th century. So, worth a look, especially if you like historical fiction. It's set in 16th century Denmark, in a Europe that's torn apart by the Reformation, competing rival powers, and it tells the story of an unworldly student, Michael Thorgersen, who becomes a mercenary under King Christian II of Denmark, describes the horrors of war, and ultimately both the king and the student end up in prison together, symbolising the fall of the country in old Europe. Well, worth a read. I think I had a read of it this week, and it is really quite a vibrant novel. So, especially if you enjoy historical fiction, it was, after all, voted the best Danish novel of the 20th century. In 1945, the year the war ended, Gabriela Mistral from Chile won the Nobel Prize. She lived between 1889 and 1957, and she was the first Latin American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. She was idolised by generations of Latin Americans as the national school teacher, mother of Chile, and indeed she did pursue in her early life a career as a school teacher. She taught school, she became a school principal, and she was heavily involved in educational administration. She was very much a committed intellectual who spoke out for the poor and downtrodden in a way that expressed both progressive, I guess, and spiritual values. Is, informed by the Catholic Church. Her name, Gabriela Mistral, was in fact a pseudonym that she adopted while she was a school principal and administrator. You don't want the students to know you're writing strange poetry, do you? But her real name, her birth name, was Lucila Alcayaga, born in the Andes in Chile. And she, in fact, borrowed her pseudonym from a previous Nobel laureate, Frederick Mistral, from 1904. You can check the video on him, the link below. The Gale Dictionary of Literary Biography says her poetry has endured long after her death, unlike many Nobel laureates. The strongly spiritual character of her search for a transcendental joy unavailable in the world contrasts with her love for the materiality of everyday existence. I particularly enjoyed her poem Cassandra, which, uses the strong European mythical figure of Cassandra, the prophetess, surely a potent myth at this time, at the end of the disastrous World War II. Here is a little stanza from that poem. I am the one who Apollo left as a pledge of his love, 2 lucid eyes. Without tears I sailed on a sea of tears, and stepped down without balking from my captive's car, understanding and consenting. I've got a little bit more from that poem and links to where you can read a whole book of Gabriela Mistral's translated poems for free online at my Substack at jeffrich.substack. In 1946, there is a famous Nobel laureate you've probably heard of, Hermann Hesse, from 1877 to 1962. He was born, raised, and lived most of his life in Germany. But after 1923, he was a citizen of Switzerland. So, formally speaking, when he won the prize, he was Swiss. He was a lonely outsider and a bit of a difficult child, incredibly well educated and informed in the great curiosity of German culture and scholarship at that time in the cultures and civilization and religious traditions of India. Those religious traditions, those cultures and civilizations found their way very much into Hesse's fiction. He also had family connections to India and had travelled to India in 1911, where he had direct experience of these religious traditions and practices and the practical wisdom traditions of India. And as a result, he wrote a series of books, Siddhartha, Steppenwolf, Narcissus and Goldmund, and The Glass Bead Game, which are suffused with references to those cultures and religions. Indeed, Siddhartha is a short novel that retells the story of the Buddha. He very much absorbed this Indian tradition of spiritual wisdom. In Siddhartha, he wrote, "Wisdom cannot be imparted. Wisdom that a wise man attempts to impart always sounds like foolishness to someone else. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. One can find it, live it, do wonders through it, but one cannot communicate and teach it." Whether he really lived up to that wisdom and that philosophy in his personal life, I wonder, in my Substack this week. Make sure you subscribe to that if you're interested in maybe ways in which Hermann Hesse didn't quite live up to his own philosophical standards. Our last writer, our last winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature for this week is André Gide. I think it's Gide or Gide. It'll be a bit embarrassing if I go through his entire video and say his name incorrectly. And the very first person we looked at, Roger de Gard, in fact wrote a memoir of André Gide. So I've travelled a little bit of a circle in this video. Gide was arguably the most influential French writer of the early and mid-20th century. A moralist, an advocate of homosexuality before it was popular, and a great French classical stylist. In 1951, the New York Times said that he was France's greatest contemporary man of letters. He also had a controversial life, and I don't go into too much detail about that for content warning issues here on YouTube, but you can read the full story in my Substack at jeffrich.substack. But he travelled, I guess, the range of the political spectrum over his life. He led a life of many transgressions. It led ultimately to his books being placed on the Roman Catholic Church's index of banned books, and he shared one of the weaknesses of so many Roman Catholic priests. He famously said once, "Believe those who are seeking the truth, doubt those who find it." And I think that is a very fine expression to perhaps end this video on. So make sure you share, like and subscribe, and maybe check out one of the other videos of the 120 Nobel Prize for Literature Challenge right here.